Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Native American History for Dummies by Dorothy Lippert, Ph.D., and Stephen J. Spignesi. Narrated by Laural Merlington. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Limit of liability disclaimer of warranty. The publisher and the author make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this work, and specifically disclaim all warranties, including without limitation warranties of fitness for a particular purpose. No warranty may be created or extended by sales or promotional materials. The advice and strategies contained herein may not be suitable for every situation. This work is sold with the understanding that the publisher is not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If professional assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. Neither the publisher nor the author shall be liable for damages arising herefrom. The fact that an organization or website is referred to in this work as a citation and/or a potential source of further information does not mean that the author or the publisher endorses the information the organization or website may provide or recommendations it may make. Further, listeners should be aware that Internet websites listed in this work may have changed or disappeared between when this work was written and when it is heard. Introduction. The history of Native Americans is, ultimately, the history of America. They were, after all, here first, right? And we cannot truly know who we are today without looking back at the first occupants of this land and understanding how their presence, cultures, and beliefs influenced and shaped everything that was to follow. The indigenous people who were here hundreds of years before Columbus arrived are now known by several terms, including the most common: Native American, American Indian, Indigenous Peoples, First Nations in Canada. In this book, we basically use them all, mainly selecting which identifying term to use based on clarity and historical accuracy. For example, we often use indigenous people when referring to a time hundreds of years before European contact. Why? Because there was no America at the time, and referring to the native peoples of that period as Native Americans or American Indians is just plain silly. Indian is the legal term for all tribal people in the U.S., including Alaska. So even though it's a misnomer, this ain't India, folks, the term has become part of American law, and so we use it freely. Native American is the more popular term these days, but even that one has its opponents. Why? Because it's technically inaccurate. Anyone born in America is native to America. Thus, your second-generation Italian-American next-door neighbor can logically, albeit ludicrously, refer to himself as a Native American. But we use it anyway, because it's part of the American lexicon. About this book. Native American History for Dummies is a general interest reference work that presents much of what you might want to know about Indians in America, from the earliest migration theories to the newest techniques for identifying remains for repatriation. Plus, the organization of this and every other For Dummies book makes it perfect for either listening straight through, selective listening, or the listening of individual, self-contained chapters. Each chapter is like a mini-book unto itself, and within each chapter, the content is organized by headings for ease and for continuity, unto itself. You can even skip material in each chapter and still absorb the info of the chapter with no problem. Conventions used in this book. When using one of these web addresses, just type in exactly what you hear in this book. Foolish assumptions. What we assume about you, oh dear for dummies listener, is that, for one thing, you know how to listen. Sorry, little joke. Seriously, though, this For Dummies book assumes that you have a basic foundation in simple American history. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and so forth and so on. We also assume that if you bought this book, you are more than a little interested in the history of pre-Columbian peoples on the North American continent, and that you are open to having stereotypes exploded, myths debunked, and sacred assumptions desacredized. Desacredized is probably not a word, but we think you know what we mean. How this book is organized. This book is structured into parts, chapters, and headings. Parts are all-encompassing, single-theme, topic-based collections of chapters grouped together. Chapters zoom in on specific topics and look at these topics in detail. Headings and subheadings are how chapters are organized, and they zoom in on the material even closer. Let's put it this way. Imagine you're the Hubble telescope. Come on, just play along, okay? As you listen through the book and move from part to chapter to heading, it's sort of like you're turning the thing that makes the Hubble zoom in on a planet, a star, a UFO, or the guy in the apartment building across the street playing the oboe in his underwear. Here's a rundown of the individual parts of the book and what they cover. Part 1. America before it was America. These chapters look at how the people who were here before October 12th became Columbus Day got here, the different cultures and peoples, where they settled, what America looked like thousands of years ago, and how the tribes formed and where they migrated. Part 2. Interacting with others. These chapters talk about what happened after the first Indian said, "Honey, we've got company." Plus, they look at great leaders and warriors, how the Spanish and French explorers often made a mess of things, the fighting that went on, and still goes on, and how Indians have interacted with the U.S. from the nation's earliest days up through today. Part 3. Working for a living. Food, shelter, clothes, and travel. These chapters look at these basic needs of all Indians and how they provided them. Part 4. All in the Native American family. Tribal structures, families, how languages developed, and how signs and pictures served as communication tools. Also, this part looks at the religious beliefs and creation myths of tribes and talks about how artifacts like peyote and totem poles are used in ritual and worship. Part 5. In a modern world not of their making. This part looks at the often grim picture of Native American life today. But it also points out how things are getting better and highlights Indian endeavors like gaming, offshore mineral rights, forestry, coal mining, and individually owned businesses. Part 6. The part of tens. This fun section looks at Native American museums and cultural centers, movies and documentaries, and great books about Native American history. Icons used in this book. An icon is a visual symbol that tells you you're about to learn something cool. Tip. This one is commonly a piece of advice about Indian culture or protocol, or a tip on how to make use of Native American resources to continue your learning and study. Remember. This is information you should try to remember, if possible. The fact that we're saying, remember this, should be a tip-off that it's valuable and worth learning. Warning. Remember Lost in Space? Danger, Will Robinson. No, this icon doesn't really warn you against dangerous stuff. It's more like watch what you say or don't do this type info. Technical stuff. This is ignorable info, mainly because it's usually highly specialized technical information that we felt obligated to include. To show off for our mothers, mostly, but which most of you probably won't be too concerned about knowing. Where to go from here? You can listen to this book any way you want to, start anywhere, and go anywhere. Part 3, Working for a Living, is probably a good place to start, since it's a daily life kind of chapter, and will immediately acclimate you to the whole Native American mojo, to boldly mix cultural references. Remember, For Dummies books are meant to be fun to listen to and to make finding out more about a topic easy. The entire series is a unique blend of both discovery and entertainment. So go explore and be entertained while so doing, okay? Part 1. America Before It Was America. In this part, the United States is just over 200 years old, yet the land the country occupies has been here for millions of years, and there have been people living here for tens of thousands of years. The debate as to how the native peoples arrived here is ongoing, and include both overland and by water theories. The point is, the North American landmass has a lengthy history, and in this part we will look at what the landmass was like eons ago, how the first people arrived here, how tribes developed cultures, and where they all settled. Chapter 1. The Rich, Troubled Past of the American Indian. In this chapter, getting a new perception of the American Indian, checking out their ancient beginnings, sorting through struggles and successes, looking toward a bright future. All Americans need to know the undeniably wonderful, oftentimes troublesome, commonly awe-inspiring, sometimes regrettable history of our country. Economic miracle and global influence? Great. Slavery and the near extinction of the Native American peoples? Not so great. The American identity is multifaceted and has been forged in a cauldron of countless influences, one of the most important being the fact that the Indians were here first. Why is that important? For the same reason that many states have passed resolutions apologizing for slavery. The Indians were here when European explorers arrived and claimed the land as their own, using authority they believed was given to them by God Himself. That's pretty powerful validation when you think about it, and it helps explain how European settlers had zero qualms about taking what they wanted and eliminating native peoples at will. They were doing God's work. The price of greatness. Knowing and understanding the genesis of what many believe is the greatest country in the history of civilization is important because it puts this achievement, known as the United States, in perspective. It illustrates that greatness often comes with a price, and that price is commonly the exploitation or the elimination of others. But don't get me wrong, this is not a diatribe against the great American success story. It is simply a reminder that one of the signs of a truly evolved society is its willingness to admit the travails of its past, which America consistently does with dignity and grace. The history of the American Indian is the story of ancient civilizations, ancient cultures, glorious rites and rituals, and evolved societies that were fully developed and functional when they first met the European explorers and settlers. In Native American History for Dummies, you look at who Indians were, what happened to them, and who they are now. You can find out more about their homes, their hunting, trapping, fishing, and other survival practices, their rites of passage, their battles, both with Anglos and each other, their creation myths, their cultural practices. You will hear from great warriors and leaders, and hopefully gain that aforementioned perspective on how the creation of America impacted an entire race of people. In the beginning. The first part of this book discusses the many theories put forth to explain how the native peoples who were here when the first Europeans arrived got here. Some say by land, some say by sea, but the bottom line and the undeniable historical and scientific fact is that there were certainly hundreds of thousands, and more likely millions, of indigenous people already inhabiting the North American landmass when it was discovered. The theories. A few theories as to how this huge population came into being in North America are looked at, including the migration across the Bering Sea theory via the Beringia land bridge, the arrival along the western coast by boat, the theory that the Chinese may have been here first, a similar theory that the Celts may have stopped by earlier. Why should you care about how the people we now know as Indians, Inuits, Aleuts got here in the first place? Why is this important? Because their history is your history, and it is critically important that science pinpoints the genetic ancestry of as many of the Earth's populations as possible. Such information has consistently been used to pinpoint important genetic and medical facts that have been used in the battle against disease and ethnic-specific medical problems. Plus, it can't be denied that even though Santayana's reminder about those who don't know their history are bound to repeat it is now something of a cliché, there is a huge amount of truth in it, and the reason history is studied is not to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. The stages and waves. While studying Native American history, it is also of value to identify and discuss the different stages of cultural development and the geographical migration waves of Indian tribes and ethnic groups. You will look at Clovis and Folsom cultures, Nadini culture, the Inuits and the Aleuts. You also journey through the development stages that have come to be known as Archaic, Plano, Pueblo. And don't forget the K-Man. The discovery of the Kennewick Man was a huge step forward in making scientists and tribal peoples even more confused about the Paleo-Indian period and who lived where and when. The K-Man was not supposed to be where they found him, or it could actually be the other way around. The K-Man was not who scientists expected to find where they found him. Controversy has raged ever since the remains of the indigenous male known as Kennewick Man was discovered in 1996. As many as 5 tribes initially claimed ownership of the remains of someone they believed was their ancestor, and it took a court ruling rejecting their claims for kinship to get them to drop their suits. So, who owns the Ancient One? Right now, we do. Yeah, that's right. I'm talking to you. The American people own the remains of Kennewick Man. Well, more accurately, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a federal agency, owns the remains because they were found on land controlled by the Corps. The tribes of then and now. The tribal migration patterns resulted in Indian settlements all across North America, from the northwest forests and western shores to the plains, the southeast and southwest, and the northern woodlands. Some tribes were enormous. Many were very small. An overwhelming number of tribes are now extinct. The 5 civilized tribes were the tribes that had the largest populations, inhabited the most land, and had the most influence, both among other tribes and with the white man. The 5 civilized tribes are the tribes the Anglos negotiated with and did business with. They consisted of the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, the Creek. Other important tribes included the Navajo, the Lakotas, Nakotas, and Santee, the Chippewa, the Pueblo, the Apache, the Iroquois, and the Arctic tribes. Native American History for Dummies provides concise biographies of these varied tribes, with emphasis on how and where they lived, what they were known for, and what their status is today. Unexpected visitors. Once the Europeans arrived, the Indian tribes had to deal with them, whether they liked it or not, whether they wanted to or not. Columbus was first to come in contact with tribal peoples, specifically the Arawaks on the Bahamas and later Haiti, and that intercourse didn't go all that well for the natives. Columbus put them to work as slaves, sent many back to Spain as slaves, and, as the historical record unequivocally shows, treated them, well, let's just say it was as though the Golden Rule didn't exist for the Italian explorer and his men. Spanish and French explorers soon followed Columbus. After all, the so-called New World was like a bottomless treasure chest of national resources for bearing wildlife, game, fish, and other riches that were absolutely irresistible to Europeans. Soon to follow were such explorers as John Cabot, Amerigo Vespucci, Ponce de Leon, Hernando Cortés, Jacques Cartier, Hernando de Soto, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, Marquette and Joliet, La Salle. A plethora of persistent personalities. Tribes always were, and still are, the foundation and cornerstone of Native American life and culture. Indians identify themselves by their tribe. I'm Choctaw, I'm Navajo, I'm Cree. Tribal identity is as important to American Indians as national ethnicity is to European-descended people of America. I'm Italian-American. I'm African-American. I'm Polish-American. Yet it is commonly the fascinating people of the tribes, specific tribes, memorable individuals, that are spoken of most often these days. Native American leaders and warriors have permeated white culture. Their names have truly become household names. Geronimo, Cochise, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Pocahontas, Tecumseh, Chief Seattle, Sacagawea. From the 16th century through today, Indian tribes have produced great leaders who have often been visionaries working diligently to maintain the aforementioned tribal identity and not allow their pasts to fade away into the annals of time. Their aspirations have not always been fulfilled, and many iconic American Indian leaders have watched sadly as their tribes were dispersed, or their land was taken, or their past was forgotten. Things are somewhat better these days. Native American culture is thriving, and many tribes have websites and historical foundations and museums working to educate people, both tribal and Anglo, about Indian history and the roles tribes have played before, during, and currently in the history of America. The U.S. government, through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, strives to support Native American community efforts, and laws have been passed to protect rights that have been commonly trampled on in the past. The Smithsonian Institute's Museum of the American Indian also works diligently to chronicle Indian history and culture. War stories. The history of Indians in America has been violent, but not always. Treaties were signed, and peace did exist for great lengths of time between tribes and the white, as well as between rival tribes. But warfare was one of the main causes for the devastating population losses tribes suffered through in the 16th through 19th centuries. Interestingly, both the whites and the Indians had advantages and disadvantages. Whites had superior firepower, but Indians were incredibly skilled at surreptitious movement and attacking from concealment. Some of the more important battles, meaning influential and impacting both the Indians and the Europeans, in chronological order, covered in this volume include King Philip's War, the French and Indian Wars, Pontiac's Rebellion. Also, Indians fought on both sides in the major wars as well: the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War. Many battles with Indians have now become an iconic part of our history, and their names have morphed into having more meaning than simply identifying where the conflict took place. Movies are made, books are written, and even people who have limited knowledge of history have heard of Little Bighorn and Wounded Knee. Dysfunction Junction. Relations between the United States government and American Indians have been troubled from the start. That's an undeniable historical fact. This reality resonates throughout the Native American community today and permeates the Indian culture and zeitgeist. The U.S. was formed at the expense of the indigenous peoples, yet great effort has been consistently made to remedy the wrongs and repair the damage. Treaties were broken, tribes were relocated, children were taken from their parents and placed in government schools. Reservations were offered as a trade-off for land grabs, yet they were often inferior in all ways. Sovereignty works. There's still a lot of catching up to do, but Indian self-determination is, as Harvard professor Joseph P. Kalt, author of a 2005 Harvard American Indian Project survey, says, the best policy in 100 or 200 years for solid progress in taking the tribes out of poverty. Self-rule, Kalt wrote, brings decision-making home, and local decision-makers are held more accountable to local needs, conditions, and cultures than outsiders. The 7 Ways. Over the centuries of U.S.-Indian relations, the United States has implemented 7 specific approaches to dealing with the Indians. They are treaties, 1608 to 1830, removal, 1830 to 1850, reservations, 1850 to 1871, assimilation, 1871 to 1928, reorganization, 1928 to 1942, termination, 1943 to 1968, self-determination, 1968 to the present. Currently, self-determination is the official policy of the United States government. Indian tribal nations are sovereign entities, and the U.S. deals with them like individual countries. They make their own laws, impose and collect their own taxes, and yet are still an important part of America. Stepping up. The U.S. has not shirked from remedying wrong. In the last 35 or so years, many acts, bills, and programs have been passed and launched to benefit the Native American community, including the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, 1975, the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, 1978, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, 1978, the Indian Child Welfare Act, 1978, the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, 1990. Daily life. The history of any ethnic group is also told by how it lived and continues to live on a day-to-day basis. A group's living arrangements, its eating habits, the clothes it wears, the games its children play, its religious beliefs, its parenting practices, its art and music, all these elements combine to paint a rich and textured portrait of a people. Regarding sustenance, Native Americans relied for food on hunting, trapping, fishing, crops. Trading also played a huge...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?